There is nothing quite like cozying up and playing some original recipe Nintendo GameBoy games. Eight-bit joystick. Nowadays, we have cell phones as powerful as a computer in the palm of your hand, but there's just something deliciously retro, cozy, simple, and comforting about playing the Nintendo Game Boy. It really was revolutionary in 1989, but now it is the coziest retro console that you can curl up with. I'm going to cover 15 essential games that you should absolutely start with when you get into playing Nintendo Game Boy. Don't forget to subscribe because next week I'm going to be covering essential Game Boy Color games and the best way to play all Game Boy games in 2024. And then, the week after that, I'm going to cover essential Game Boy Advance games, so you better subscribe. Now, on to the games. Tetris. Tetris on the Game Boy is the perfect puzzle game. It was created by Soviet programmer and designer Alexei Pachmanov. The gameplay is made up by maneuvering a series of various shaped puzzle pieces that are made up of 4 blocks, and as they fall, the player has to rotate and position them in a way to make continuous lines without empty spaces. When a line is completed, it disappears. The blocks keep falling, leaving the player in a constant race to find a new position for the next block. It sounds simple, but challenges your brain as the blocks start falling faster and faster. If you make a mistake, it can really throw you off, and the game is over when the stacks of blocks reaches the top of the screen. There is actually a very entertaining movie which is currently on Apple TV Plus called Tetris, which is a dramatized account of the fight to get the international publishing rights to Tetris and then sell it to Nintendo for their upcoming portable Game Boy system. This took place during the last dying years of the Soviet Union, and the fight for Tetris actually went all the way to the Kremlin and corruption at the KGB. Nintendo had originally intended to launch the Game Boy with a Super Mario game, but this changed their mind once they saw Tetris and its incredible synergistic potential. Tetris also makes perfect use of the Game Boy link cable and allows for really fun competitive head-to-head action. I used to enjoy playing head-to-head Tetris on the school bus with other kids. Nintendo included Tetris with the Game Boy in all regions except Japan as a pack-in title because they knew it was a perfect introduction to the world of the Game Boy. It was so in 1989, and it continues to be so in 2024. Pokémon Red and Blue and Pokémon Yellow Special Pikachu Edition. It is hard to determine which game was more influential to the Game Boy, Tetris or Pokémon. While Tetris started the fire in the hearts of Game Boy fans, it was Pokémon that stoked it and kept it going. It came out 9 years after the launch of the original Game Boy, but it quickly became a global phenomenon, and people bought Game Boy systems just to play Pokémon. Pokémon, at its heart, is a JRPG about a youth setting out to travel the world and to become the very best Pokémon trainer. Pokémon is a Japanese portmanteau of the English word pocket and monster. The game was originally called Pocket Monsters in Japan, but it was quickly abbreviated to Pokémon. In the world of Pokémon, there are these magical creatures that either roam the world in the wild or are tamed and are used to combat one another. Certain Pokémon have different strengths and weaknesses based on their type, and you can upgrade them by using them for a long period of time. Pokémon also takes advantage of the link cable, and Pokémon can be traded from one game to another. It also spawned a ridiculously popular anime series which had continued in one form and another to this very day. When Ash Ketchum finally became the world Pokemon Master, it made news around the world. There are 3 different versions of Pokemon on the original Game Boy. It really is okay to start on any one of them, while the Pokemon Yellow Special Pikachu Edition will have some story elements of the popular anime. Pokemon continues to be a global phenomenon and is beloved by millions of gamers all over the world for the past 25 years, and the Game Boy is the best place to start playing it. Super Mario Land. Super Mario Land might be the first Game Boy game ever made. Nintendo actually developed it before licensing and developing their own version of Tetris. It is a little bit of an odd one out in the Mario game series. It's obviously inspired by the original Super Mario Bros., but it doesn't exactly have the same jumping physics, and instead of throwing fireballs, Mario throws a bouncing ball. It actually has side-scrolling shooting stages when Mario flies in a spaceship. But it was made right at the time when game developers realized that you can't just take an NES game and get it to work right on the Game Boy without first not only simplifying the graphics, but they would actually have to distill the gameplay into a simplified form to take advantage of the slower CPU and slower refresh rate of the Game Boy screen compared to a CRT and Famicom. You are going to see a lot of game series that originally started on the Famicom and NES in this video, but the Game Boy was the crucible that distilled them down to their most common basic form, and in doing so, they ended up with a very creative new entry in that game series. It is strange that Super Mario Land came out after Super Mario Bros. 3, but it feels like a sequel to the original Super Mario Bros. Game. Super Mario Land is an excellent place to start when playing Mario games on the Game Boy. The Legend of Zelda: Link's Awakening. Legend of Zelda: Link's Awakening is the 4th Legend of Zelda game, but is the first one featuring an original story that's not directly set in the land of Hyrule. It is set on an island nation. There is a town with many characters that you can interact with, and they will give you various quests that will connect to your overall quest to awaken the Windfish. It is played from a classic top-down perspective, but you can swap out your sword for one of the special items. This game features excellent puzzles, a really charming and unique art style, and it was also really influential on the mainstream Legend of Zelda games that came after it. When the Game Boy Color was released, they came out with The Legend of Zelda: Link's Awakening DX, which could be played on either system, but with color graphics on the Game Boy Color. Whichever version that you play, The Legend of Zelda: Link's Awakening is a charming and timeless Legend of Zelda game. Super Mario Land 2: 6 Golden Coins. With Super Mario Land 2, Nintendo returned to post-Super Mario Bros. 3 physics to deliver an excellent traditional Super Mario game that returns to the core gameplay of running and jumping, but you can pick up shells and throw them. This is the game that introduced Wario as the main antagonist, who would later turn into a protagonist in later Nintendo games. I would pay real money if Bowser got his own game and Jack Black played him in it. In Super Mario Land 2, you can pick up a Super Carrot power-up and fly with Super Rabbit ears. There is a wide variety of different themed levels and zones, and some intricate Nintendo graphics and characters. Not only is it the best Mario game on the Game Boy, it is also one of the best 2D Mario games ever made on any Nintendo system, and it is not to be missed. Metroid II: Return of Samus. Metroid II is the direct sequel to the original Metroid game for NES and Famicom Disk System. It is the best classic side-scrolling action-adventure game on the Game Boy, with excellent atmospheric exploration, challenging combat, and a sense of isolation. Samus Aran has to track down the parasitic super creature Metroids before they are used for nefarious purposes. As you traverse a cavernous labyrinth on an alien planet, you find items to upgrade your power suit, which helps you solve puzzles and unlock more areas. This game is also a little different because you actually encounter a lone Metroid hatchling and you form a bond with it. Nintendo had been working with Game Boy hardware for 3 years by the time that they made and published Metroid II, and their experience with the hardware really shows with this well-made, classic, underrated gem of a game. Donkey Kong. Donkey Kong on Game Boy starts off as an arcade port of the original Donkey Kong game, and then you realize that Donkey Kong escapes into a larger city, revealing a series of intricately crafted platforming environments that require a nimble hand and a lot of thinking to get through. There are over 100 levels filled with intricate puzzles, tight platforming, many secrets, and a surprisingly amount of depth. Donkey Kong also throws things and chases Mario across collapsing platforms. Mario also has an increased moveset beyond just jumping and can swing from vines and throw barrels as well as doing acrobatic flips. This was also one of the first games that supported the Super Game Boy mode and had enhanced colors and backgrounds on Nintendo's Super Game Boy for the Super Nintendo. Donkey Kong for Game Boy is one of the best Mario and Donkey Kong games that people don't know about, and you should fix that and check it out. Wario Land Super Mario Land 3. For Super Mario Land 3, Nintendo decided to give Mario a break and instead handed the lead role over to former/current villain Wario. In this game, he sets out to fight across a pirate-occupied island to capture a golden statue of Princess Peach. There are many well-done landscapes and levels such as bubbling hot springs and candy meadows. Wario Land unfolds as a branching map, offering more freedom to visit past areas. Wario himself is a bit of a brutal beast and can barge into enemies, grab them, and toss them around or slam into them with a powered-up shoulder charge. There is also upgrades such as a fire-breathing flame helmet or a dragon helmet that lets you fly. Nintendo really decided to have fun and go in a different direction with this game, and I'm really glad that they did. Kirby's Dream Land. The Game Boy was home to the very first Kirby game and laid the groundwork for the Kirby game series that we would all know and love over the years. Made by HAL Laboratories, Kirby comes from one of the best 8-bit developers in Nintendo's history. Kirby is a round pink puffball of a hero who could jump, flap his little wings, and he can suck in bad guys, eat them, and spit them back at other foes. In later games, you can eat enemies and gain their power-up abilities, which you can then later use to traverse the platforming environments. But in this game, you can inflate yourself like a balloon, jump and eat bad guys, and it starts off simple, but it's not the longest game in the world, but it really offers a delicious, bite-sized 2D platforming adventure that's a ton of fun for players of all ages and all backgrounds. Final Fantasy Legend, also known as Makai Toshi Saga. For the Game Boy, Square made 2 game series for Nintendo's portable platform that were called Final Fantasy in the West, but they themselves were completely different role-playing game series in Japan. Final Fantasy Adventure was Seiken Densetsu, and Final Fantasy Legend was Makai Toshi Saga, the first of the Saga series. Final Fantasy Legend combines non-linear storytelling, classic dungeon crawling, and open-world exploration. You take control of a party of 4 highly customizable heroes with 8 different classes such as humans, mutants, and monsters, each with their own strengths and weaknesses. The real innovation in Final Fantasy Legend is its open-ended nature and the fact that it didn't have a set storyline and offers the player an incredible level of immersive freedom and choice in how you tackle its challenges. It's a surprisingly rich RPG for the Game Boy, and it inspired many more entries in the Saga series. Square really produced quite a lot of non-Final Fantasy role-playing games that you shouldn't pass up. Castlevania: The Adventure. Konami made some really great games for the Game Boy, and they made 3 Castlevania games for Nintendo's portable platform. In Castlevania Adventure, you play as Christopher Belmont, who has to fight across Transylvania to get to Dracula's castle and then to defeat the evil Count Vampire for what he hopes is for the last time, but considering it's the first in a very long-running game series, it was not the last time a member of the Belmont clan faced off against the evil vampire lord on the Game Boy. It is a mostly linear action Castlevania adventure, no pun intended, and there are some hidden areas, but it is not a giant Metroidvania. Our hero's movement isn't quite as fast or nimble as the other games, but it still delivers some pretty good game action on the Game Boy's relatively low-resolution LCD screen with a quite slow refresh rate. This entry in the Castlevania series delivers a pretty decent amount of challenges, and the 8-bit soundtrack is pretty robust and takes advantage of the Game Boy's stereo sound capability. Konami continued to make 2D Castlevania games on Nintendo's portable platforms throughout the Game Boy's life, 3 awesome games on the Game Boy Advance, and then even some awesome 2D Castlevania games on the Nintendo DS. Castlevania: The Adventure is where you want to start if you want to get into all that awesome portable Castlevania goodness. Final Fantasy Adventure, also known as Seiken Densetsu. When is a mana game not called a mana game? When it is Final Fantasy Adventure for Game Boy. Square's beloved combat action adventure series did not start with Secret of Mana on the Super Nintendo, but rather right here on the Game Boy. To their defense, the only game that had any degree of sales success in the West at this point was Final Fantasy, so you could see their motivation in wanting to call every role-playing game project that they were trying to publish in the West as a Final Fantasy game. Players take on the role of a young warrior who must wield the legendary Mana Sword to protect the Tree of Life, the source of life in all the world. The game blends action RPG elements like real-time combat and exploration and stat-based character progression. You'll traverse a diverse landscape from lush forests and bustling towns to treacherous dungeons, battling enemies and solving puzzles along the way. The story, though simple, is surprisingly mature for a Game Boy title, exploring themes of loss, redemption, and the power of nature. Gargoyle's Quest. Gargoyle's Quest is an offshoot of the Ghosts and Goblins series, or Makaimura games, but it flips the script and has Firebrand the Demon from the original games as the hero in this branching paths Metroidvania-like action game. You can breathe fireballs at bad guys and fly and hover to navigate some pretty good Capcom level design. It actually features a pretty decent plot about defending the demon realm against invaders, and there are RPG elements with upgrades and an economy. It actually was a spin-off that received its own sequels on the NES and Super Nintendo. Gargoyle's Quest is more than just a Ghosts and Goblins game on the Game Boy, but they designed a new game that is connected to a well-loved game series. Gargoyle's Quest is some generally great Game Boy platforming action. Nemesis. With Nemesis, Konami took their long-running and quite excellent Gradius spaceship shmup game series and brought it to the Nintendo Game Boy. At its core, it is a good Gradius game, but there are some twists such as the option to choose your starting stage and to choose the amount of life to customize your own challenge. There are also hidden bonus stages. Each stage has a distinct theme and enemy roster. It has tight Gradius gameplay, and it is pretty technically impressive for an early Game Boy game. Kirby's Pinball Land. Kirby's Pinball Land is a fun and animated pinball game made by HAL Laboratories, starring everyone's favorite round pink hero, Kirby, as the ball. In a way, it is a follow-up to Nintendo Pinball that was one of the earliest Famicom NES games. There are 3 Kirby-themed pinball tables, or pinball lands, that are all animated with adorable Kirby graphics, boss battles, and minigames. It pushed the Game Boy's animation and graphical capabilities pretty far. Why play Game Boy in 2024? There are a number of excellent reasons to play the Nintendo Game Boy in 2024. The biggest is that there are no distractions. It's not like playing games on your phone. There are no notifications. It is a calm, zen-like experience that allows you to focus on the game. There is the tactile delight of clicking physical buttons. Game Boy cartridges are fun to collect and they don't take up a lot of room, and they tend to be a lower price than TV console Nintendo systems, especially if you opt for getting the Japanese version of them. Many of the games are designed to be pick up and play, and there is an experience of simplicity and joy to the Game Boy library that is often lacking in modern systems. The Game Boy is a distraction-free, cozy refuge from the modern world and is a timeless gaming classic. The Game Boy, a testament to Yokoi's ingenuity. We can't talk about the Game Boy without acknowledging its visionary creator, Gunpei Yokoi. This brilliant Nintendo engineer wasn't just the mastermind behind the Game Boy. He built upon his earlier work with the iconic D-pad and the Game & Watch and Nintendo's success with the Famicom. The original Game Boy was all about efficiency. Yokoi said, "The Nintendo way of adapting technology is not to look for the state-of-the-art, but to utilize mature technology that can be produced cheaply." The Game Boy revolutionized the world of gaming upon its release in 1989. Despite its codename, DMG, standing for Dot Matrix Game, initially, even within Nintendo, the project was jokingly referred to as Dame Game, or Not Going to Game. But it was an ambitious project. Instead of simple on and off LCD graphics like the Game & Watch, the Game Boy boasted a 2.6 reflective super twisted pneumatic LCD display with a resolution of 160 by 144 pixels and a near square 10 by 9 aspect ratio. Its 2-bit gray palette, ranging from light green to dark olive, and its signature slow refresh rate created the signature LCD blur effect, but the lack of color was its strength. Yokoi's philosophy of lateral thinking of seasoned technology perfectly captured the Game Boy's essence. It prioritized efficiency with a price tag under $90 and a remarkable 15-hour battery life on 4 AA batteries. This tank-like, almost child-proof device could withstand the rough handling of children, putting most modern smartphones to shame in terms of durability and battery life. At the heart of the Game Boy was a very efficient custom 8-bit Sharp CPU running at 4.9 MHz. This resource-constrained environment pushed developers to be creative, resulting in some innovative and engaging games. Despite only having a single mono speaker, the Game Boy even offered stereo sound output through the headphone jack, and it sported a built-in link cable connectivity for multiplayer action, and this was before most personal computers even had modems or networking ports. The Game Boy was the natural evolution of Nintendo's innovative spirit in the 1980s, and it's a testament to the brilliance of the engineers, designers, and programmers at Nintendo's R&D, as well as the talented developers who brought the system to life. Notably, despite its name, Game Boy, the Game Boy was popular with female players, with 46% of Game Boy users being female around the world. With over 18.6 million Game Boy units sold worldwide, including the Game Boy Color, the Game Boy's legacy as a pioneer of portable gaming remains unmatched. There is just something magical about the timeless simplicity and creativity of the Nintendo Game Boy. I would greatly appreciate it if you would consider liking this video and subscribe to this channel because I make weekly videos just like this. Next week, I'm going to be going over the essential Game Boy Color games and all the ways to play Game Boy games in 2024. And then in 2 weeks, I'm going to cover the essential Game Boy Advance games. So you better subscribe. This is 8-Bit Joystick. Stay awesome. Play retro.